Speaking of Putin and Cuba, how must it make Cuban Canadians feel to see Canada send one of our own naval vessels to dock alongside a Russian warship as a sign of our long-standing bilateral relations with the communist regime there? There's the latest lunacy from this government, who claim to be fighting authoritarianism and taking seriously the threat of foreign interference. But over the weekend, we learned that a Canadian warship had been sent to anchor nowhere else but in Cuba alongside a Russian warship as a token of friendship with the communist regime of Cuba. Wonderful. And what's worse is that when our foreign affairs minister was asked about this during a TV interview, she replied this weekend it was news to her. News to her, colleagues. Doesn't this sound like something our foreign affairs minister ought to know, especially if it was a well-planned decision, as it has since been described by Minister Blair? Then again, this is the same minister who also supposedly didn't know that her staff attended a garden party at the Russian embassy shortly after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. This is the same department, Global Affairs, that we now know, thanks Ensicop's confirmation of a Globe and Mail story, had been warned numerous times about the suspect action of a Chinese diplomat right here in Canada. We had to learn that from Globe and Mail. They claimed that CSIS didn't have a proper understanding what regular diplomacy looks like. I would argue that these officials and this Trudeau government don't have a proper understanding of what foreign interference looks like. It's something that's highlighted in the Ensicop report, colleagues. Don't take my word for it. The lack of common intervention threshold. We talked about it at our National Defense Committee right in this chamber. While other nations and other Five Eyes have legislation in place, have empowered their national security forces to take action, we're still debating what the definition of foreign interference is in Canada. That's where we are in 2024. And at any rate, this is the same diplomat who was ultimately expelled from Canada, but only after someone at CSIS anonymously blew the whistle. And that's only when Global Affairs Canada took action. And yet the same minister, Ms. Joly, had the unmitigated gall to go on television this past weekend and tell Vashi Capellos that Canada is the most forward-leaning of G7 countries in combating foreign interference. Colleagues, I fell off my chair when I heard that. Forward-leaning. Canada has become a laughingstock amongst the Five Eyes when it comes to foreign interference. They are not only ahead of us in the implementation of measures, including in this legislation pertaining to intelligence sharing, but also in establishing a foreign agent registry. We're the last to come to the party. And Ms. Joly thinks we're the most forward-leaning because we're having a public inquiry right now on foreign interference. An inquiry which our government was dragged into kicking and screaming. We have the Hogue inquiry, in spite of Justin Trudeau's best efforts, not to call one. And this minister wants to point to that as a measure of the government's success. Like everything else with this government, they say all the right things and then do all the opposite. And then act like something's being done to them, not by them. The Trudeau government has been, at best, one abysmal failure after another every time they've been faced with the threat of foreign interference, especially in our elections. And in some cases, wittingly turned a blind eye because of foreign interference was politically beneficial to them. Not only were CSIS warnings ignored by Mélanie Joly and Global Affairs, but also by the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister's office and senior officials within the Liberal Party and Liberal campaign team, they turned a blind eye, did nothing to guard against meddling in our democratic institutions, and when the truth started coming out, they lied about having any knowledge of it and instead focused on finding out who leaked the information, because we want to get the leakers. That's the real problem, the people telling the truth. When reports first surfaced that CSIS had briefed Justin Trudeau about Beijing's interference in the previous 2 federal elections, he returned to one of his favorite phrases. He claimed that the story in the Globe and Mail was false. He denied repeatedly, including in the House of Commons chamber, knowing anything or even having been briefed by CSIS. It was also news to him. He denied repeatedly. In March of 2023, when he was asked point blank in a television interview, and I quote the question, "Did you know that there was interference in those elections, not prior to, but during that campaign? Were you made aware that there was interference?" End of quote. The Prime Minister's response to a very simple question. We put together a panel so that the question could be looked at. He put together a panel to do what? To tell us what's in his head? He's the Prime Minister. When it comes to national security, the buck stops with him. In April of that year, at the public inquiry, the Prime Minister was shamed into finally telling the truth by the Commissioner. It was revealed that the Prime Minister's office was briefed by CSIS on foreign interference at least 34 times between June 2018 and December 2022, and that the Prime Minister himself was personally briefed at least 3 occasions during that time. That's the public inquiry. I'm not making this up. These are the facts, Senator Gold. CSIS drew his attention to foreign meddling in 2018 and 2019 elections and offered recommendations to guard against it in future elections. Since then, we've had 2 bills go through the House. There's a bill collecting dust here, and we needed a public inquiry to get the Prime Minister to come clean. Our Prime Minister ignored all the recommendations. He did nothing with the thin information that he was provided through those briefings. Further, he went on to lie about those briefings. He lied to the Canadian people and he lied to Parliament. Mr. Trudeau tried to claim that the information didn't reach him. During his testimony at the Hogue inquiry, he claimed that he doesn't really do much reading. Shocking. And the only way to ensure he's aware of something is to tell him verbally. Yet during a previous appearance at a House of Commons committee, the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, Katie Telford, testified that Mr. Trudeau reads every document that he's given. Talk about the left hand not knowing what the right hand is doing.